I spent the past week totally immersed in Blood and Wine for a lot of reasons. For starters, this game marks a gold standard for the size and scope of DLC. If the last $10 expansion, Hearts of Stone, truly embraced the word expansion, then Blood and Wine is a perversion of that word. It took me about 30 hours across 2 weeks to wrap up something that felt more like a small sequel than an expansion. But hey, your 20 American dollars go a long way in the Polish economy, so internet commerce is a wonderful thing. But a beautiful new region with a real expensive-looking capital city, plus dozens of side quests, plus a new Gwent deck, plus a handful of mechanical and UI fixes, still have to live up to the reality that one of the best stories I have ever played in a video game ever was somehow the cheaper of 2 DLC expansions. Hearts of Stone's main quest was good. It was damn good. Here's a video about it in case you don't know about it. But in case you do, you might understand the expectations that Blood and Wine was stacking itself up against, landing in a place that, once again, I feel is a better home for The Witcher than the apocalyptic stakes of the base game, but not quite the introspective, lit class lesson of Hearts of Stone. Which is funny because Blood and Wine does take similar angles, and takes them to some kind of extreme. I just worry that it took too easy of a path to get there. Note, this doesn't mean I'm shitting all over what is a great expansion. I seem to be having trouble critiquing things that are good but not great, so in the interest of promoting more moderation in video game opinions, I want to clarify that Blood and Wine is good, it's great, it's a totally cool, fine thing, but I have about 10 to 15 minutes. For the sake of brevity, my topic is narrow, my point specific, my goal is to create constructive criticism, and one last very important message: I love you. Blood and Wine takes us from the gritty poverty of the northern realms to the placid countryside of Toussaint, a beautiful, gorgeous, unreal combination of Renaissance-era Mediterranean Tuscany, France, and Disneyland. Traveling away from The Witcher's version of Poland means that we're traveling away from a lot of the game's unique Polish flavor. The bread and butter of the Witcher franchise, of twisting fairy tales into edgy new versions, is more on the nose this time, particularly when walking through a literal fable sphere of Disney-licensed Grimm's fairy tales. When the series previously went this far, it was with stories the global audience wouldn't immediately recognize. But unlike all the previous Witcher projects, Blood and Wine is a special occasion. It's a celebration, a retirement party aiming to conclude the saga and send Geralt's games out on a high note. So by its nature, it's more inward-looking. The primary references this time are from the Witcher IP itself, namely Toussaint as described in the last book of the saga, The Lady of the Lake, and a short story from the first anthology book, The Lesser Evil, which was itself a roast of princess tales like Snow White and Rapunzel. The Lesser Evil follows a character named Renfri who was born during an eclipse, an unfortunate coincidence because the people believe that to be a curse. Growing up so ostracized gradually prodded her into a life of banditry, eventually returning to a town housing one of her old enemies, which is where she crosses paths with Geralt in the book. Which is the same story of Sylvia Anna from Blood and Wine, whose hot childhood temper plus her eclipse-shadowed birth begged the age-old debate of nature versus nurture. Troubled characters born with superstitious foreshadowing is a tried-and-true literary device. Most everything here has the setup for a good little Witcher episode. The strong characters are there, strong motives are there, an enchanting and fully capable backdrop is there, but what's not there is the uniquely subversive qualities that ice the cakes of the best Witcher stories. The bread and butter of the Witcher franchise, why it digs up those old tales, is to give us cliches to subvert and expectations to shudder. The joy of The Witcher is the process of opening a CD jacket covered with this angry, pale metalhead riddled with spikes, only to find out that he's not that angry, he has a good sense of humor and genuine love for his friends. It's the shock of discovering how a physically abusive husband can be written with real empathy, or discovering how 3 hours of Hearts and Stone were spent partying at a wedding where nothing goes wrong. In short, it's finding humanity in unexpected places. And a good dose of humanity is what's missing from the major players of Blood and Wine. Detlef is set up to be a sympathetic villain blackmailed by a greater villain up until he decides full well on his own right to attack a city full of innocent people, including the outlying orphanage, because his feelings are hurt. And one arc in particular, the part where you're discovering the vampire Oriana's secret reason for sponsoring an orphanage, almost makes a mockery of the lesser evils concept that named the story the game's based on.
You see, Witcher? The world's not black and white, it's shades of all kinds.
I run into dilemmas all the time. Situations where it's hard to judge, hard to know what's right, make a decision. This is not one of them.
If you really wanted me to sympathize for a vampire raising children for blood, you probably shouldn't have brought it up in the middle of a scene where vampires are killing a bunch of children for blood. But just like the other details of the plot, it's not that her subplot wasn't thoroughly thought out ahead of time. Fun fact, her story was actually foreshadowed in plain sight in a pre-release trailer and in the main menu. But it feels like a year later, when it came time to write the finer details of this scene, deadlines had to be met sooner rather than later. Likewise, Silvana's feud against her sister is thoroughly thought out, but it's not relatable. It falls into the common fictional trap of being a problem easily solved by just talking it out.
You never tried to find me.
That's not true. I searched for you, sent out knights, gathered tidings from without. You did not wish to be found.
A problem as common as the classic video game fallback of needing a constant drip feed of some kind of combat. In particular, it's these brawny fistfights that seem to be intended to keep the player from dozing off when we're playing The Witcher. The dialogue is written well enough to keep us awake. We don't need to always have a fight. But come to think of it, didn't this happen during the wedding in Hearts of Stone? I guess the violence was dissolved with enough comedy there that it didn't feel out of place. I didn't even notice. But in Blood and Wine, brawls happen all the time for the silliest reasons. For such a supposedly peaceful land, you can't talk to half a Toussaint without getting in a fistfight first. Such problems of being a video game story also appear with the need to loop conflicting story branches back into each other, to make use of all those expensive cutscenes they made. All three endings loop in and out of the same situations, no matter how much you piss off their respective characters. The Duchess and her particularly infuriated bodyguard will still let you in for a meeting even after they've thrown you in prison. Regis will still meet up for a pleasant campfire chat even if you reject every one of his suggestions, and no matter how bad it gets, Geralt will always play us out with a wink at the camera and a nice relaxing stay at his new home. Anyways, the three endings this time are clearly sliced up into a bad, sad, and glad lineup, and while I actually appreciated the melodramatic downer of the sad ending the most, there's a couple of inexcusably convenient devices that make the bad and the glad ones work. First one is Silvana's red ribbon, a magical artifact that keeps her alive because... magic. There's no way the player, or even she, would know otherwise, and missing it leads to a bad ending, not by way of, let's say, subtly probing the player's philosophical beliefs to create an ending specifically tailored to those beliefs, but rather by making sure you checked off all the side quests on your way through the Fable Sphere. The second one of these conspicuous conveniences is the sudden appearance of Dandelion to break you out of jail and undo everything the previous scenes are suggesting. After a good 15 to 20 minutes spent hearing a whole lot of people absolutely rip into you about how bad you screwed up, you get off scot-free and everything returns to normal because Blood and Wine is supposed to be a retirement party. It feels like CDPR didn't have the heart to send any of their players out on a bad note. Geralt's gotta have that happy ending at his fresh new farmhouse, even when the path there doesn't really make sense. And my third example of these played-out plot aids is the most damning of all. Literally, because it damns Detlef to the kind of villainy that could never be the lesser of two evils compared to anyone else in this story.
You've 3 days. You will come to Teshemudna and explain all. If you do not, I will raise Beauclair to the ground.
Your Grace, we have 3 days to bring him Siana.
You have 3 days to bring me his head.
A few moments later.
This is ridiculous. 3 days is more than enough time to go on a little video game adventure smoozing this all over. It's such a sudden jump over such a lengthy period of time that it actually feels like some extra quests might have gotten cut out here. Either that, or the eventual attack on Beauclair was dramatic enough, expensive enough, or necessary enough for the endings that the team decided players had to see it no matter what. That is the low point. Thankfully, most of the scenes with Regis have fun enough dialogue to smooth over the creases in this story. Also, thankfully, the main quest high point is one hell of a high point, something that satisfies exactly what I came for. The twists that the spoon-obsessed White makes on its parent tale are subtle enough that they're nowhere near your nose. You really gotta dig for them. It's Beauty and the Beast, but the genders are reversed, the specifics slanted, and the conditions of her curse laced with black humor. Instead of finding true love to turn this beast back to normal, she just needs to enjoy a meal with company. Its development and conclusion is the stuff of a surreal fever dream, the stuff that exemplifies the qualities of what I've come to love about this series and our hero. The whole quest from beginning to end is just delectable. It is spot on. Even though it is pretty irrelevant to the rest of the story, despite folding into themes that also seem like they were snipped off, like the potential to expand and populate Geralt's wine estate, and also proving the generosity of his chivalric values. And that is a big chunk of Toussaint context that is deprived of content. It's the hypocrisy of Toussaint's chivalric values. When you sum up the content of this game as a whole, it feels like roasting Arthurian chivalry was almost going to be more of a theme to this expansion. Toussaint's courtship rituals are straight screwed. From the goals of your side quest to the revelations of the main quest to the notes scattered in the most useless of optional areas, you keep finding examples of women callously or unknowingly leading admirers on to their doom. Scores of infatuated men thoughtlessly go along with it, either under the guise or the full convictions of Toussaint's version of chivalry, a process involving devotion and manipulation that's even seen in the story of Detlev himself. It would seem that the cause of most death and suffering in the duchy is actually lovesickness, or at least the expectations, rituals, and virtues its people have developed to explain it. And that's great. It's beautifully poetic, actually. Silvana's master plan directly jabs at the hypocrisies with this system, and even hints that she was planning some kind of social revolt, but they're hypocrisies that we never fully explore. They're kind of hand-waved away by the writers to spend more time hearing about Silvana's personal reasons for vengeance, but more of a focus on the social ones could have helped her justifications seem more reasonable. It's sad because there really is clout there. Toussaint constantly feels like a place too good to be true, like the dream could all collapse at any moment, but none of the three endings really play with the thought of making everyone face the realities of the world. Even after a horrifying attack on the city, it just quickly goes back to functioning as normal. But honestly, why would the story have it all go sour if CDPR's grand scheme was to give Geralt a place for his own happily ever after ending? I get it, I understand their love for this character and the earnest desire to end it all on a high note, but there is a bad ending to Blood and Wine, and it's completely neutered by how it has to go on to end as every other single ending does, with your old man and his old flame finally settling down after all these years. Blood and Wine's main quest is paced like that of the base game. It shines in regular beats on and off, more so in subplots than the main one. This expansion is heavier on optional content than its main quest, which is a reversal of the Hearts of Stone situation. Which brings me to another storytelling aspect that I do appreciate, the trilogy of side quests between Wine Wars, A Night for Hire, and Big Feet to Fill. The details of these stories aren't anything interesting, but they're notable because they serve as a step to solve the Ubisoft problem of making all those little dots on the map have meaningful content. Those 3 side quests, plus the Gwent tournament, plus the Grandmaster Gear treasure hunts, basically contract you to visit almost every little dot on the map, and all of that sprinkled content has a note scribbled somewhere telling its story. It is contrived, reading so many notes eventually becomes tiring on its own right. It doesn't fully solve the problem, but hey, baby steps. The base game had useless caches of treasure inexplicably spray-painted around, and hell, lots of games do these days, so now not only did they think up excuses for all these treasure chests, but they also fed them into more fleshed-out side quests. I would accept and expect more sandbox games to try that trick in the future. So even if the main quest suffered for this expansion's scope, for its focus on quantity over quality, it still brings some worthy and maybe more practical ideas for how to improve open-world game design, which is something that the last expansion did so well that I didn't even notice it was gone. The problem of main quest urgency. In Hearts of Stone, your main boss character was sending you out on tasks he thought impossible, not really expecting you to return, so you weren't exactly keeping him waiting by spending days playing Gwent instead. On the flip side, Blood and Wine rushes you to stop a serial killer before the next murder, and then when it does give you a 3-day deadline to solve the mystery, it fast-forwards through that by cutting to black. It's just awfully unfortunate that the main topic of the video is a review of the main quest, and that the main quest here has to follow up on Hearts of Stone. But I hope critiques like these serve as a learning experience for CDPR as they go into Cyberpunk. Between Hearts of Stone and Blood and Wine, both expansions have taken successful stabs at solving the issues of open-world game design. Hearts of Stone wasn't just a high-minded, mind-trippy accomplishment, it was also a wonderfully practical story for this kind of video game. Its pacing allowed for the player to distract themselves off the beaten path, and it was based on a tried-and-true story that already works. What Blood and Wine does is take its most throwaway optional content and feeds that into more substantial side quests. Both of those solutions, and both of these expansion packs, show us how to fill hundreds of hours of content with meaningful moments. And both of them, regardless of their issues, still serve as some of the best value purchases in gaming ever. It's just that, between the two of them, I still can't believe that one of the best stories I have ever played in a video game ever was somehow the cheaper of two expansions for Witcher 3.